Okay, so V made another video response, and this one, using his own words, it makes my blood boil. Okay, so this is the problem I have with him. I mean, I like some certain things about him, so I like his moral fagging videos where he talks about how we should moral fag, right? Like, I admire him for that, but when he doesn't know what he's talking about, he doesn't show a sense of humility. Not even like, uh, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe I should look into it more and talk to more people before I make a video. Uh, he just has all these convictions based on his personal experience, and he doesn't care about other people's experiences. It's all these are anecdotal data, anyways, right? But what he experienced, it's correct. It's correct. I can't roll my R. And other people's anecdotal experience, other people who actually work in the fields that he's talking about that he is not, shrug. Okay, so I'm just gonna make a point by point video to this. I don't have a script. I don't have time to make one. All my videos are as quick as possible because I have shit to do. Unlike V, who plays video games apparently 12 hours a day. Okay, let's see what he has to say.
Hey everyone, so JF in an 8-hour stream took his time to address my video and offered me some criticism, which I'm going to address. The first criticism that he has towards me is why did I say that I'm talking like a scientist to another scientist? And he basically just, I suppose, waters down the definition of a scientist. Like, oh, a scientist is like another person. There's nothing special about having a diploma. And if I were to talk with another colleague of mine that has studied medicine for 6 years, and I would say that I have a patient that has class 2 NIHA, and I
Okay, so this is the first point that he gave. He's talking about expertise, because I think he somewhat admitted that he somewhat acknowledged that he's not a scientist, and he's not. I'm sorry. I it's really difficult for me to believe in actual scientists, which means that people who actually participate in the field of publishing papers based on formulating novel idea, formulating hypothesis, actually doing experiments, setting up experimental design, do an experiment, and then analyze your results, and then drawing your conclusions, and then going through the peer review process that he's so like to harp on about how great it is. You know, I I find it hard to believe that anybody who actively involved in such a thing would say the things that he says. And this is something that I really want to talk about, which is, okay, there are kind of two types of people. I'm just kind of generalizing. Okay, I know it's more complicated than that, but I'm just gonna point out two types of people. One type is the type of people who are extremely good at memorizing terms and definitions and procedures and descriptions. Okay, I mean their memory capacity is just, I don't even know. I mean, I'm talking about people that I saw in my history class who can remember dates down to the date. Okay, not just the year, not just the month, but like the year, the month, and the date of something happening. They can remember who all 14 Louis are, or maybe even 16. The King of France. I mean, even though their names are all Louis something something something, they can remember who they were. Okay, they can remember super complicated terms, and this is something that I'm not good at. Okay, I mean, I cannot do that. My memory capacity is shit compared to these people, and they're just so good at this kind of thing. And there's another type of people who they're not good, but they can actually think critically. So something that they do understand, they can make better synthesis, better domain transfer, and I'll get into what that means. And be more skeptical about facts, so to speak. Okay, and I personally fall more into the latter, and personally, it always amazes me how people who have such great mental capacity to memorize terms cannot do domain transfer. And what I mean is that they can understand a certain concept very well in their field or in the things that they're passionate about or the things that they thought a lot about, something that's personal to them, but when they try to apply that to something else, they just can't do it. So I can give you a typical example, which is that I met this doctor, this PhD person who used to be a postdoc at my university. And this guy has something like 3 degrees. I'm not sure if they're all PhDs, but he has been involved in the field of some kind of engineering and computer science for a pretty long time now. And anybody who is a programmer knows that if you're a good computer scientist, if you're a good programmer, then your logic has to be pretty good, right? I mean, mathematicians have really good logic, but in terms of doing something practical in the real world, creating a product, I would say probably programmers, at least good programmers, have the best skills of logic. But it's only a certain types of logic. And so this guy is really, really smart, okay? But we had a talk, and this was during the atheist movement time still, and he just told me something so stupid, like, if you're an atheist, if you call yourself an atheist instead of an agnostic, then you're just as fundamentalist as the fundamentalist Christian, okay? Because you don't have even a shred of skepticism in you, right? I mean, you just have conviction. You just don't even think about maybe you're wrong. So just right off the bat, I gave him a very easy example. I said, okay, what if somebody came over and told me that your mother is going to kill you tomorrow night? How should I respond to that? I'm going to say, no, she's not, right? And then he's like, how do you know? How do you know that she's not gonna come and kill you tomorrow night? And I'm just gonna be like, well, based on the evidence that I have for 30 years that I've known her, I don't have any reason to believe she's gonna come and kill me tomorrow night, right? And then, but this guy just keeps pushing on. So it's like, oh, you're not being skeptical enough. You're not agnostic about it. You're just a fundamentalist. That the idea that your mother can't come and kill you tomorrow night. And if he just keep pushing it, I'm gonna be like, shut up, okay? My mother is not gonna kill me tomorrow night. And he's gonna see, this is what I've been talking about. You're just a fundamentalist. You don't believe this shit, right? I mean, you have conviction, right? Very simple. See, I pulled that right out of my ass, pretty much, just an example, because I can do synthesis. And this person apparently cannot, even though he, in terms of doing computer science, he just, he's like a god. And I'm just like, I don't know. I don't want to say an insect, but, that's what I feel like anyways. So it amazes me personally that people who are so good at doing things in their field and people who are so good at knowing a lot of knowledge and remembering terms and definition descriptions cannot do proper domain transfer. Okay, they cannot do proper synthesis, which I find to be very easy. So if I actually understand something, I can do synthesis. Very easy. Okay, I can apply to anything, anywhere, and I can also use the same principle for a lot of different things. But apparently this is very difficult for most people that I've encountered. And of course there are people who are good at both. And I personally know one, this big-headed guy in your country, by the way, V, who can do both. I mean, he can read like 3 biology books and remember everything from those books, and he's also super smart in doing synthesis. And I know you're watching, fuck you. So this is really ultimately what it comes down to, V, which is that you don't seem to really have a scientific mind. You don't have the mind of the latter, at least that's how I tend to think about, and I think JF would also tend to agree with me when we think about what is a scientific mind, which is that we don't think things in terms of just terms and descriptions and procedures. We think about how to properly evaluate facts and truth. This is something that JF has said over and over again, which you ignored, basically. This is what a scientist does. It's not what a doctor does. It's not what a lawyer does. As I've said in my previous video, these people, they can have high memory capacity, remembering terms and definitions and descriptions and procedures, and they know how to use that knowledge to, do the diagnosis or do what they're supposed to do. But the thing that separates you guys from us is that you don't try to come up with novel questions to challenge the existing facts, the existing theories, and not only just challenging the theory, but thinking about, are the methods that were applied to come up with this idea is correct in the first place.
Some pathological Q waves on his AKG, and his ejection fraction is starting to go below 50%, which has me very worried. I would expect that the colleague of mine knows what I'm talking about. It would be shameful for a doctor not to understand it.
Okay, so what if he's not a doctor but he understands? What if he said, you know what, I didn't go to medical school because I don't want to spend money on it. I guess in Romania is much cheaper, but in the US, there are people who want to pursue a certain field, but they don't have the money for it, right? So they just said, you know what, I decided to read all these things on my own. And this person happened to have a really great amount of knowledge. So you don't expect him to have it if he's a layperson. But what if he says to you, you know what, V, I know these things. I read about them. I'm not a doctor, but I know about them because I've studied very in depth into what you're talking about. You don't have to tell me, what's what. I know them. What about that?
Well, if I would go and talk with the family of the patient, I would have to explain what's wrong with his heart. If I would use...
Sure. If the patient asks you, the patient says, dear doctor, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Please explain it to me. Then you do it. If you just explain things, to the person might think you're being condescending. The person might be like, you know what? I know what you're talking about. Shut the fuck up. Because the person might know. Okay? That's the difference.
These terms that I use with my colleague, they would just be baffled. So obviously, having a fundamental basis of understanding in a field is required if you want to talk about certain concepts. Now,
sure, yeah, you need to have a fundamental basis of understanding, which you do not, number one. Number two, those are not necessarily measured by expertise in terms of getting a freaking degree. Okay, and this is really at the heart of the problem right now, because as JF has said, we're pretty much handing out PhDs like in a cereal box. Okay, this is what he said, because right now there is a problem of how you acquire those PhDs. And yes, different places are different. Some holds to more integrity when it comes to the matter. Others, they just want to make money, so they're willing to give you a PhD for practically doing undergraduate work, right? It depends on where, and it depends on the political situation. It's not a black and white thing that you're making it out to be. V.
In my case, I guess I used the word outdated, which is basically my lack of grasp on the English language as much as I wanted to. But what I wanted to say is that yes, the theory has been disproven, the outcake theory. In order to disprove a theory, you just have to show a single thing that the theory can't explain. And
this is actually not true. Darwinian natural selection has many things that they cannot explain, and in fact, the random mutation of the gene that makes for selection, he didn't come up with that. We didn't know about that, actually. But we still say that his theory is correct. We still use his theory, right? Because your theory just has to be a model, like JF has said. The model, as long as the details of your model isn't completely wrong, for example, if Darwin used the Lamarckian model of evolution, we would say that that's wrong because the whole thing is wrong. Okay, Darwin came out with a model and he's right basically. But there's some details, some small details that he can't explain yet. There's some, and it doesn't conform completely to his model. So it's just like that we can use a perfect circle, right, to model something that's round. A sphere, for example, to model something round. Let's say the Earth, we say it's a sphere, but the Earth is not really a complete sphere. It's actually more ellipse-like. Actually, there are no perfect spheres in the world, but we use a sphere, the geometric shaped sphere, to model something like Earth or any other round objects, right? But you can't just say, oh, well, therefore, the notion of the geometric shape, the circle, is disproven, right? It's disproven. Like this model of a circle and with this mathematical equation, it's disproven. Why use that, right? Because we need to use something else because this rock has some ridges. It's not perfectly smooth. This round rock, it's not perfectly smooth. So why do you use a circle to model this thing that's round?
Why RK is not used? It's not used since 1982, since this paper was published, which has the scientists looking at the population of fruit flies, that under case selection they're starting to show more and more traits that are associated with off selection. So it's something.
Okay, so it seems that they're still using the RK selection paradigm, aren't they?
That the theory is not able to explain, and because of this, a new theory was made which explains it better. The moment when you use age structural models as a framework, everything else makes a lot more sense. And this is just one point. There's other papers that contradict or show things that the RK model is not able to explain, and this is why life history paradigm is actually used. You asked.
Okay, V, at this point, you know what JF is going to say? He's going to ask you to explain the RK selection theory and how your evidence is going to disprove that theory. Please do it.
For the paper that disproves it, here you go. Another aspect that actually I found quite cringeworthy is that, according to JF, biology and psychology is not that different because biology deals with animals, humans are animals as well.
That's actually not what he said. He meant that there are many psychologists who study biology, and vice versa, by the way.
So, according to him,
Or I should also add that there are many psychologists who have expertise in biology, and vice versa. And that's because biology and psychology are two very related fields. They're not exactly the same, at least as of now. They could be combined, actually. And there are people who suggest that we shouldn't have so many departments. We should just all have everything interdisciplinary, right? And then you would just have one department, and where psychologists and biologists are pretty much indistinguishable from each other because they have to learn each other's expertise, so to speak.
Psychology and biology aren't really that different. So, psychology is a social science, biology is a hard science. The fact that I need to say this is bewildering. But
Well, the fact that you bring this up, shows me that you just have no idea what the fuck you're talking about, okay? That you're not actually involved in the field. Right now, everything is becoming more interdisciplinary. That's what JF was bringing up. Maybe in Romania, everything's just separate, and then I feel sorry for you guys because you're just, I don't know, not keeping up with the modern world. But the reason why we do interdisciplinary study is because that right now science has gotten to the point where things needs to be combined. And I know that you're going to talk later on about, oh, thank God that Romania doesn't have, like, let's say, social scientists infiltrate them. What you're not taking into consideration is that if they're forced into an interdisciplinary study, then they are forced to learn the stuff. If you separate them out in different departments, then they just, they just create their own echo chamber. Again, I'm talking relatively speaking, right? And this is the reason why women study people, they don't go interdisciplinary, actually. They just hang out with their own people. They don't want to talk to somebody from another field, okay, who knows more about the stuff than they do. They don't want to do that. They want to just create their own echo chamber. In my field, because I'm a psychologist, okay, I'm forced to learn even computer science, okay, so I learned during my undergraduate study, I learned, I think about, let's say, half of my courses are biology courses in a department that from which I took the courses, okay, so that's where I learned about selfish gene, extended phenotype, and I had to learn about cells and all that stuff, okay, and I told you I'm not very good at that, but the class where I excelled were actually, ironically, the higher up ones when you talk about concepts instead of memorizing terms, because I told you I'm not very good with that. But when you talk about application, when you talk about how each model is described and how each model is applied to something else, and you want me to write something about it, I can do that if I understand the model.
As you guys know from the definition, I'm saying this for the people, not for JF. I'm pretty sure he knows it. Biology is the natural science that involves the study of life and living organisms, including their physical and chemical structure, something that psychologists don't do.
I do. I have to study that. And depends on what specialization you want to go into. A psychologist would have to study that. Let's say if you go into neuroscience as a psychologist, you would have to know down to the exact how a neuron is fired. When I went through school, I had to dissect sheep brain, as a lab activity. Now you tell me whether or not that's biology or not.
Don't go into the chemical structure. Biology also goes.
Oh, of course they do. Potassium, sodium, and the balance of which creates an action potential. If they're over a certain threshold, is that not chemistry?
Into the functioning and development and evolution of creatures, right? So, meanwhile, psychology is the science and behavior of the mind, aspects of conscious and subconscious experts and thought.
Yes, that used to be what it was. Yeah, that is true. But now, because psychology has to evolve, they're now having to merge with many other fields. They have to become interdisciplinary in order to be able to improve their studies, improve the quality of the paper they're publishing. For example, right now in the institution where I'm doing my PhD, I have to learn programming, basically, because I'm a psychologist, but the entire discipline is leveled around building technology. It's leveled around creating computational models to predict, let's say, human ratings of concreteness, for example. So it's still psychology because the human perception of abstractness and concreteness is a psychological phenomenon. But now we're trying to use mathematical models to predict these ratings. Okay, so this is pretty hard science stuff, and as a result that we have to learn all this shit, we have to take pretty hard science classes. It's not separate. Okay, and as a result of this interdisciplinary stuff, we're forced to work with computer scientists. Okay, and of course they get frustrated that we don't understand the things that they understand, but we have to learn. That's the idea. We have to learn it, even though we're psychologists.
It is a social science that tries to understand groups, subgroups, and individuals. To say that a hard science equals a social science, I would find it insulting. But
he never claimed that. They're not equal, but they're related. Get this into your head.
the problem that I have with this is that you notice that social sciences, especially women's studies, is also trying to unite with psychology. So you're basically creating this gateway for the people in women's studies to infiltrate psychology and then infiltrate.
Sure, they can try to infiltrate it, okay? And if they have the power and if they get psychologists on their side, it can create a problem. But in terms of actual, if you do it right, in terms of actual interdisciplinary studies, what they would actually have to do is to learn actual psychology, not their bullshit stuff.
Straight biology. Because if women, by this logic, people bought into women's studies. Women are also part of the animal kingdom. So clearly, psychology is not that different to women's studies. And if psychology is not that different to women's studies, then biology.
They're actually not. In the psychology department, and especially with the clinical people, okay, not the experimental people, but the clinical people. Yeah, there's a women's gender study organization group. I only heard their presentation once, right? But women's studies, they can team up with psychologists. But this is not the point. You can be from women's studies and you can make true statements about biology. That was what JF was getting at. He doesn't care. He personally doesn't care about your expertise. He cares about whether what you say is true or not.
Biology is not that different from psychology. Then, papers published by Digra saying that, sexist video games cause sexism is a biological fact now.
Well, no. Other people can challenge it. What is stopping other people from challenging that? What?
Every science has its own field.
Well, again, you're like way behind the current year, so to speak.
And to mix them up like that, which you say is something that's happening in your universities, is not happening in the universities of my country, at least, thank God, is something that I find quite concerning. Biologists are biologists, psychologists are psychologists, psychiatrists are psychiatrists, and neurologists are neurologists. We don't
Yeah.
necessarily mix them. This is why we have different specialities, each with.
We don't necessarily mix them. So, do you concede that we sometimes do mix them? See, this is your problem, V. You think very compartmentally. This is what I'm trying to say. I don't know if this is a signature feature of people who have very good memory capacity to be able to memorize terms. Maybe they do. Maybe it's because they're very good at organizing all these things into, boxes, so to speak, like a mental box, and that's how they're able to, remember like a huge book of terms and descriptions and definitions, something that I'm not able to do because I don't have mental boxes. Whenever you're talking about categories, when you're arguing semantics, my mind just goes basically because I'm just not convinced. Like I don't like to be boggled by definitions, by categories, by all this stuff. I don't. Why? Because my mind doesn't work like that. Whenever you tell me categories, I'm gonna be like, are you sure about that? And then I go investigate. And then at this point, after 13 years of doing this shit, okay, I come to realize that there is no such thing as neat boxes. Those things may be useful depending on what you do, and if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, those would be very useful, but it's not useful to a scientist, and I mean a real scientist. It's not useful to somebody who wants to search for the truth, who want to find better method of thinking, who wants to challenge facts and claims and arguments and all that stuff. And it's definitely not useful for domain transfer.
Their own field. Now, another criticism that I got is that why is it important to point out that someone who's a psychologist can't write in biology? So, in the case of med school, it takes 6 years to become an MD.
Oh, boo-hoo.
And then, if you want to write a
it takes, for PhD, it takes 8 years to get a PhD, at least.
paper, most people who want to do that, they have to get a PhD.
Oh, and by the way, did he say 6 years? Well, in America, just medical school, you can go to just for 3 years, not 4. And to do your undergraduate, you can also go for 3 years, not 4. So then you can do a 6 years too, I guess. But I guess most people do it in 8 total. But as somebody explained to me, the school system in America is very different from Romania because I guess as soon as you go to college, you go to like a special school. There's no such thing as a general undergraduate school because in America, what you do is that you declare pre-med. So you have to take all the general classes, your biology classes, and you have to select the major that's the most related to what you want to do. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a specific major. So you can literally major in psychology and become a doctor. It's fine because you just have to pass the medical examination and show your grades are great and kind of try to prove to people why with your psychology major you can still become a doctor in medicine, right? And that's more difficult than if you major in MPB, which is the case in my university. And by the way, my university was one of the top universities in terms of medical school. And most people who went there were pre-med or pre-pharm or whatever. And the major they tend to choose is MPB, which stands for neurology, physiology, and behavior. That's basically the major they declare in. But again, you don't have to. So again, the school system in America is very different.
Which is like 4 more years, and after 10 years of studies, you can try and write a paper that might get passed into peer review.
Yeah, and it's been 13 years for me. It's been 13 years. So are we measuring it by years? I don't know. And you know why it took me 13 years? Because during the time when I was doing my psychological stuff, I was actually spending most time building technology tools for my professor's grant. That's something that's probably going to boggle your mind, but this is the reality. Yes, we're psychologists and we're creating technologies through army grants, through government grants, and we actually have to make a product, make a program, something that's fun, and something that use even video games to help people learn. And that's basically what I spend the most time doing, and I barely had any time to even do my thesis.
So, from this, you are telling me that someone like J. Philip Rushton, who's a psychologist with no diploma in biology, and you're telling me that, okay, you know what, maybe he studied in his free time, and he managed to somehow, without going to any biology, to get a degree in biology, he managed to publish a paper that is factually accurate. This is not impossible, but it would be spectacular, you know.
Well, I know that there are psychologists who have published in very prestigious hard science journals. There's a guy who published in Science, no less. I don't remember his name because, like I said, I'm not good with remembering names and things like that. There are several. I personally know several professors from my university who publish in biological journals.
Someone who didn't study in that field and doesn't have a diploma in the field to manage to publish a paper that's being recognized by the scientific community would be just something utterly astonishing.
Well, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with what he said. If you want to say, Rushton is full of shit, okay, say what's wrong with his paper. Now, let me just make something clear. I know about J. Philip Rushton. He was actually a scientist I knew since 2010. Him and Jensen, and there's another guy, I forgot the name, Flynn, was it Flynn or somebody else? I don't remember. They eventually got kicked out of the scientific community, so to speak, and they fucked off, and they pretty much kind of cocksucked each other on the intelligence journal, right? There's some evidence that other people have provided me that show that he's probably a racist, or who knows. But the thing that made me really angry was that nobody wants to talk about his results. Nobody wants to even remotely address his claims, okay? All they tend to say when they criticize his claims is that, your assumptions are not correct, I don't even want to engage with your data, even though his experiments, he'd done numerous of them, found some really interesting things that should be addressed. I don't want to even look at them. I don't even want to engage in them. Because, we shouldn't do race and IQ, because there's no race, and IQ, and there's no IQ, there's no race. The end.
Not impossible, of course. However, again, this paper was not only discredited by other scientists in the field, both psychologists and biologists, but it also didn't pass peer review. I don't know what other thing I need to bring up in order to discredit this claim. say that you don't know who this individual is, which again I find it dismaying. If you don't know who this individual is, how did you manage to debunk Kraut's video? Because
I don't actually remember Crowd bringing up Rushton. So I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
you point out that I haven't watched your video, and thus I am a hypocrite. Now, indeed, your video was a little bit too long for my taste. It was like 2 hours. I did watch parts of it. I believe I watched like 20 or 30 minutes of it on twice the speed.
And you didn't pay attention, I bet. Because if you paid attention, you wouldn't even say, I find it astonishing, why did you even address Crowd's video? Like, I listened to Crowd's video numerous times, nowhere did he mention Rushton.
But if I'm a hypocrite for not watching your video in entirety, aren't you a hypocrite for not watching Crowd's video and not watching my video?
He made a full response from beginning to end. How can you say that? See, this is the problem. You're lying, V. If you watched JF's video, you didn't pay attention.
We all hypocrites now. Join the hypocrite club. So, according to J. Philip Rushton, he's not making biological claims. He is making psychological claims. Anyone who actually reads the paper understands that he is not talking from a biology point of view.
Okay, so this is the part where it kind of really annoys me. Okay, so here's a model. It's called RK selection, and V is saying that you cannot use this model because it's a biological model, and you're a psychologist, so you shouldn't be using this model for psychology because they're separate, whatever. I can just give you a very simple example in psychology that we use the model from another field, and it is valid to model something in our field, and this is the brain as computer paradigm. Okay, the cognition is like a computer. Okay, now I'll give you a really simple example, which is that there are people who say, well, brain is not exactly like a computer, right? So you cannot use computer to model. Really? Can you not? This is the question. Because there's a guy I interacted with, and he kind of makes the same claim. He said that, well, the brain is not like a computer. And we're talking about something a bit more philosophical. He said that because we have free choice, basically, we're not machines, right? And he said that we're not like a computer because we do have free choice. I can decide X or Y or Z. Like let's say if there are two things for you to decide on, I can decide X or Y. Computers cannot do that, right? And this is where you kind of put a facepalm. It's clearly that this person that doesn't even know about the field of computer science, because there are models which takes both Y and Z into consideration. So in my field, there's something called latent semantic analysis, right? And what it does is that it takes in large number of documents, and it kind of create like a dimension for words, so to speak. It's a very complicated process, but then it creates probability, and it makes decisions based on those probability. So it's not just that the computer has a command like x plus y equals z, and here you run your, here you get the results. It's that, I make decisions based on probability. Okay, so I take in both x and y. And you can say that this is many way how the brain works. The brain takes in many stimuli, okay, and it takes in consideration of all kinds, and it makes a decision. So you have both x and y in your brain, and you make a decision based on what is the best outcome for you. Okay, so we don't consciously compute like an actual number for the probability, but the idea is there. So I just used, in this case, computer science to model how our mind works. So sue me.
He does use the RK as a metaphor. He says that a person who wants to...
Okay, and all this metaphor bullshit, I just want to address, okay, this metaphor thing. I would not call it a metaphor. And you're using it as a model, or you're using it as kind of an analogy. Like, I don't understand why they use this word metaphor over and over again. It's, it's not correct in my opinion.
he's using the R strategy, right? But even if you read the RK biological model, it also talks about the gestation period. It also talks about the number of children per gestation. It also talks about the reproductive organs, and these are
Yeah, and these are things that alternate hypotheses have addressed.
not things that J. Philip Rushton is talking about. Right? He's talking about the state of mind, which is a metaphor. And I find it really annoying when I see people who are trying to push an ideology using J. Philip's findings, which have been debunked by the scientific community, but they are still using their.
Well, they haven't debunked him so much as they sort of strawmanned him, pretty much. Because the methods that he used are fine, at least if you compare to the methods of other publishable scientific experiments. I'm not saying that he's right, okay? I think what he did has many limitations, but again, I would rather an actual objective criticism and debunking his findings using other findings, and there's no such thing, really. Because people are not replicating his studies because it's a political thing.
Findings in order to push as this is a biological fact, as if people can become archetypes and thus can become animals. And you can see plenty of these individuals in my comment section. For instance, in the previous video that I made about the subject, there was this individual who claimed that gypsies are like animals because they have around 10 kids.
Okay, well, this individual is not an alternative hypothesis. It's not JF. There are crazy individuals everywhere. So, you know, whenever I listen to Karen Strong's video, there will be really extreme, stupid MGTOWs who say that women are just evil. You know, they're just selfish creatures. You know, there's like no way that they can ever become good, etc. So, should I then just discredit the men's rights movement?
The way we can use this as individuals who are not versed in a particular field to discern which is fact from fiction, we use peer review. This is the only and the best way to tell if a paper is right or not. Now, some people will say, well, science existed before peer review, and this is correct.
It's not the only way.
In order to publish a paper before peer review, you would have.
Actually, I'm pretty sure if JF is going to make a video response to this, he's going to point this out. This is actually not the way to see whether or not something is true or not. It's not because of peer review.
To basically be friends with the editors. It was on the editor's whims if they wanted to publish your paper or not. And this is why you have so much junk science. This is why you have Dr. Smoke Camel. Cigarettes are good for you. Radioactive beauty.
There's a lot of junk science in peer review paper too. I mean, have you not seen many peer review paper coming out of, you know, other departments like women's studies?
The peer review isn't the end-all know-it-all, which is true, right? It's not the end-all know-it-all, but it's the best system we have. And if you want to take a paper and say, well, this one was peer reviewed, but it was peer reviewed poorly, then sure, we can look at it, and we can.
Well, just because it's the current best system that we have doesn't mean that the system itself is not running into problems due to many factors, or that you shouldn't improve it. Okay, V? I mean, you know, a few hundred years ago, monarchy, absolute monarchy, was the best system that they had. Literally. But then that got improved. That's the idea.
And see, okay, why was it peer reviewed poorly? But to just say that hand dismiss peer review and be like alternative hypothesis and say, well, the people doing peer review are all a bunch of clowns anyway.
I don't know if you actually watched his video, okay? What he's saying is that the current peer review system is highly problematic. He's not discounting peer review. See, this is the problem with your dichotomous, compartmentalized thinking. There's a thing called peer review, and it's an idea that your paper should be reviewed and validated and criticized by somebody who has expertise in your area, and this is a very good model, okay? But then when you implement it in the current system, there are a bunch of problems right now, and it's that problem we're attacking. It's the system right now. We're saying that it's problematic. And again, if you actually actively involved in the peer reviewing publication process, you would know this, V. It's highly problematic right now.
So why should someone submit their papers to peer review? It's just retarded. Absolutely retarded. It's like saying, why should a professor give grades to students?
Well, once again, anybody can criticize the paper. Anybody can find out the truth. This is the problem. Now, this is the issue. Now, there's a separate issue, which is that how do we implement a better system? Because this system involves not just grant funding, which you would bring up later on, but how to assess promotions, how to assess things like who gets the higher income, who doesn't, who should speak at conferences, who should chair conferences. And this is a very complicated system that we currently don't have the solution for. But in terms of an individual, this individual is saying that you shouldn't just trust papers that are peer reviewed. You should apply your own thinking. So if you want to just look at peer review paper, you can. You can say that, well, you know what, peer review generally are more right, but that doesn't mean that you should just throw your skepticism out of the water, or that you should just completely ignore a paper based on the fact that it is not peer reviewed. That is the issue at hand. So you as an individual can do that if there's no censorship. An individual can simply say, you know what, these peers of mine, this editor is an asshole, so I'm going to publish my paper on my blog, right? And that paper might be revolutionary. Who knows, right? And you can still go and say that, you know what, this is really good science, even though it's not peer reviewed. You judge the findings, you judge a paper on its own merit, and this is a good practice to have as an individual. In terms of the institution, in terms of the system, it's very difficult to solve.
All students should get the same grade. There shouldn't be any difference between an A-class student and an F student. Why should...
Okay, so he's going back to this stupid analogy of grading again. So V, what do you do when you know, like, let's say, at least half the teacher you encounter, they grade based on the principle of teacher's pet. I like the student, so I'm going to give this person a higher grade. Right? And you talk about, let's go confront teacher. What if the teacher has the authority? Teacher's like, you know what, Johnny makes me smile, so he gets extra points. Would you not say that that's a problem, right? That's the problem with the current grading system. And that would be a true statement to say that there's a current problem with the grading system. And in fact, since I'm in the learning sciences, we right now have a serious debate regarding assessment, deciding how to assess and grade people. This is not some straightforward thing. Again, you're making this to be black and white. We currently don't know what is the best way to grade an individual in terms of skills. And I can even give an example on this. In terms of rating an individual based on his or her literacy skills, and we found that if you rate kids from, let's say, 4th grade, what you commonly seen is that they don't even have 4th grade reading skills. But if you look at the materials these kids read when they play video games, they're reading way above their 4th grade level. They read up to 8th grade level. So here comes a problem. So you giving them a test, okay, and you say that actually they're reading at 3rd grade level. But then you look at the video games they play, which has a lot of text. Let's say they go onto Skyrim and then they have to read all these parchments and things like that to get the items in order to fulfill the quest, right? And then you find out that they're reading way above a 4th grade level. So how do you assess that? This is a very complicated question. It's not black and white. Just like nothing in science is black and white. Nothing in science is this is just so because somebody has declared it.
The student get a sponsor? Why should the student fail and this student should pass? Right? Why? Because the professor said so? That's ridiculous. I just can't understand how people argue against peer review, considering that it has done so much for science since it has been...
Again, we're not arguing against the idea that your paper should be criticized, reviewed, and validated, okay? by somebody who's knowledgeable in your area, somebody who has high intelligence. We're not criticizing this idea. We're criticizing the current system of how it's done. Hence the difference.
Now, of course, you can point out that certain things with it is wrong. Like, for instance, if you understand what peer review is, it's usually the university professors of a certain discipline who are looking at the papers, trying to reproduce the findings. In the case of gender studies, all of it is hogwash. It's ideologues that are just trying to circle jerk each other. But in other scientific fields, it's not a circle jerk.
Are you sure about that, V? Maybe you don't know. That's what I'm saying. You should listen to what the JF has to say about that. And he was actually in the process, in the actual discipline. He was actually doing it. You're not.
And for instance, in the case of medicine and biology, it's definitely not. And people who say, oh,
well, you're wrong about that.
Only positive peer review gets published are completely wrong. For instance,
Alternative hypothesis never said that. He said that positive results are more likely to be published.
Because this is what I noticed, right? The people from the alt-right, just like the people from the far left, and I'm not just saying, okay, you're just comparing them with social justice warriors. It's just an observation. I don't know why the fuck this is happening. It's just bewildering that it is. But both of them hate peer review, right?
I'm not from the alt-right. I'm not from the alt-left. I understand what they're saying. Well, at least what some of they're saying. It's not like I watch every single alt-right video, but I saw the alternative hypothesis video, and he made a very good presentation for the problems with the current system of peer review. I can't believe I have to repeat this. Nobody is saying that, when you publish a paper, that paper should not be reviewed by another person who's an expert in your field, or somebody who's very knowledgeable. It doesn't have to be a degree, right? But it often, that person often has a degree, right? Because why be so knowledgeable if you don't get something to prove it? That's just human society. And that person will criticize and try to validate your findings and try to make comments on it. Yes, that's a very good thing. That's something that should happen. But right now, the system, how it's built, is not even necessarily based on this principle. It's just based on a system of who gets the money, who gets the promotion. It's one of the problem with competition that's been driven up really, really high, and you adding some sort of leftist and a leftist capitalist system in play with the money getting. I mean, it's very, very complicated, and we are now having a very corrupt system of peer review. So it's not the spirit of peer review, it's not the idea of peer review that's bad, at least when it's practiced with integrity. It's the current system, which is not honest.
You are a psychologist and you want to investigate the difference of IQ between blacks and whites, then you're most likely not going to get funding.
Yes, and funding is based on peer review. What do you know?
But if you're a psychologist that wants to, see that men and women are equal, and you have like a feminist spin, then you will most likely get funding. So that is something that you can actually complain, and it would be legitimate, and however, that doesn't mean that the doctor can't, fund it out of his own wallet.
You see, like, this just again proves to me that you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You're in a field that basically just says, state this and obey. Okay, just like repeat after me, here's the knowledge, memorize it, do it. Because you don't understand how the system works. In order right now, at least I know this is the case in the US and most of the West, in order to get professorship, in order to become tenured professor, you have to get funding. You have to. So if you start a publishing paper and you don't get any funding for your from your work, you're not going to get tenure, most likely. Okay? This is just a situation. So if you start doing race and biology, well, I mean, first of all, you're not going to even be able to go get through the door, much less getting funding for that. Okay? It's not to get you through the door to begin with. Now you say that you can self-fund. Really? Do you have any idea how difficult it is? how expensive it is to conduct many of these experiments. How do you think experiments are conducted? Now I'm really starting to question your claim that you're a microbiologist. You know the stuff that we use, I mean, especially in biology and also in psychology too, it's extremely expensive, right? You know that, right? You can't just self-fund unless you're super duper rich. For a regular middle class citizen, they don't have the money to fund that. Now let me just give you an example of in psychology. In psychology, okay, you can kind of get away with self-fund using the subject pool. Basically, this is something that in the U.S. this is what we do. Every single psychology student has to participate in at least one experiment, and then you use that to conduct your experiment. Okay, but since we do have this advantage, it is expected, for example, that you publish something like 2 papers per year, right? And so eventually this subject pool is going to get run out, especially if you have some very specialized experiment where you have to utilize more people outside of your university. So if you want to test on like a more general population, not just students, then you have to find money for that. And let me just give you an kind of a idea how much it would be. So one of my colleagues, she did an experiment on second language speakers, English as second language, and she found a subject from India, I think, and also China. Okay, and she used Mechanical Turk, which is this crowdfunding kind of a website, which you can put your experiment on there if it's available online, and the people do that, and then you pay them. And then so she had to find something like $3,000 to get the number of participants she needed to complete her dissertation, for this experiment in her dissertation. 3,000. Okay, now and she's when she's doing it, she's only a graduate student, right? She get paid something like I don't know, $1,400 a month before tax, right? And she has to support a kid, and I think also support her husband, who came as a F2 visa, so he can't find a job. Where is she going to get $3,000? Well, she has to get funding. That's how it is. So you're saying that, well, a professor can fund himself. Sure, like if you are a rich professor already, you can try to pay $3,000 for an experiment, right? But in order to get there, you have to have submitted to grants. You have to have grant funding in order to even to get there in the first place. So if you don't get grant funding, then you're not through the door. That's really how it is. This is the situation.
The moment you have founded it and the moment you have the study, you can submit it for a peer review. And it's not in the interest of the people who are doing the peer review to give you bad results. So all of those peer review papers that you have that say, okay, so peer review is a process that has like 20% bias and blah, 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 and there's peer review bias, it looks really bad for the paper who has been shown to show this bias. For instance, there is a case where there was this paper in Biomed that was constantly publishing hogwash. I believe it was like 25% of their theories could be replicated, the rest couldn't. And they were actually making quite a big buck out of getting doctors to pay under the table in order.
Well, so can peer review paper. Again, V, you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, in the discipline of science, in the biological sciences and also psychological sciences and also these related field, it is a lot of cocksucking. It's not dissimilar to what you're talking about. There are a lot of problems. It's a lot based on relationships. Okay, and it depends on who your editor is. Your editor could be somebody who's really nice and believe in a certain principle. Then you're lucky. Okay, but if your editor is somebody who deeply wish to strengthen his social networking so he can find a better job, then you're going to run into a problem. And this is the situation right now. And as my professor has said, universities are starting to become more like businesses or industries, and industries are starting to become more like universities. And this is a scary statement, but it's true. That's how it is. And because you're not in this discipline, you're not in the loop, so to speak, so you don't know. So you have this very idealistic view of what the scientific discipline is. And I sympathize to some extent because I hate the situation that I'm in right now. Okay, I'm just trying to make the best of it. I'm trying to get my PhD and just leave the place I'm at and maybe go find a better place. And I don't know yet. I might end up making the decision that JF did, which is to leave academia. Okay, because of all these problems. But I came in with the expectation that people are going to follow the scientific method with integrity. But this is just not the reality right now. That's just how it is.